Good morning, everybody. You must have heard by now what has happened in the nation of Syria in the Middle East. And the government of Bashar al Assad has fallen very, very quickly to a group which I've never heard of before, but we know is the remnants and the rebranded forces of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. They're called Hayat Tahrir Al-Sham. And in 12 days, they started an insurgency, took over the cities of Aleppo, and then Hama, and then Homs, and then the capital, Damascus. And they've taken over the center of the city and the capital, and they've declared themselves to be the controlling regime or government, whatever you like to call them, in Syria at the moment. I don't call them a government because they've ousted the legitimate government of Bashar al-Assad, who is now in Moscow, Russia, with his family. There was some talk that he was in a plane that took off and crashed, but that was misinformation by some people. We've seen photographs of him, and he's been officially granted asylum with his family there. So this is very, very shocking, what has happened in Syria. And my concern for the Middle East, as always, my primary concern, is that the Christians in the Middle East will be able to live freely and practice their faith as they want to do without any oppression. And the thing is, here we have so many deplorable people in the Western governments, in the Western mainstream media, the Western intelligence services, saying what a wonderful thing it is that Bashar al-Assad has been deposed. He was a dictator. He did all these terrible things. But this is the kind of smearing that goes on with someone who doesn't fit into the international program of the Western deep state. And he didn't. But what he did do in Syria is he did protect Christians in Syria. And there were, as I understand, 2 million Christians at the turn of the millennium in 2000. Now, after all of the wars and chaos that has gone on in the Middle East since 9/11, in various ways, there were only 300,000 Christians left in Syria, as I understand. And those 300,000 Christians are now in grave danger because the group that's taken over, this Hayat Tahrir Al-Sham, just often abbreviated to HTS, is a group of murderous Islamists. Oh, I don't generally like to use the word extremist or terrorist because extremist can mean anything. I get called an extremist by all kinds of people. It's a meaningless word. Even the word terrorist, the UK, the US has prescribed some groups as terrorists, but then people on the other side, they would prescribe or call the UK and the US terrorists. But, it's a word that's just used and thrown out there. But we can describe these people as Islamists, Wahhabists, Salafists. ISIS, they cut people's throats, they mass murder people. So that's what they do. And unless you are in their group, unless you join their gang, if you like, you are in grave danger. And that's the situation now, that the 300,000 Christians who live there, and also, the Alawites that Bashar al-Assad was, that was his group of people. Islam is divided into lots of groups of people. Let's say the Arabs are divided into lots of different subgroups. So his group was the Alawites. They're now in grave danger from ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra Front, rebranded as HTS. So I pray for my fellow brethren in Syria, my Christian brethren, that they will somehow be able to carry on living without being oppressed, but the early signs are not good. So I just am astounded at how disgusting the people in the government here in the UK, the people in the government in the USA and intelligence services and mainstream media are just celebrating this and celebrating this group of bloodthirsty Islamists taking over a nation which was until last week safe for Christians to practice their faith. And we've seen what they did in 2014 when they started from a small area. I think it was Mosul in Iraq, and then expanded through the whole of the north of Iraq and Syria, killing and murdering and people and cutting people's throats. And, anyone who didn't follow what they said was now the way that you have to live life according to strict Sharia law. So I fear for Syria that now it's going to turn into another territory where the situation is the same as in Afghanistan under the Taliban. And Western leaders are supporting this. And of course, we know, in the region itself, the two countries that have actually been active in supporting this, particularly the number one country is Turkey, of course. They've been openly supporting this group, and the territory they started in, Idlib province, borders Turkey, so they've got direct military support from Turkey. Erdogan has said he supports them, he likes them. And of course, Israel, the nation in the Middle East that calls itself Israel. It's not, of course, the Israel of God according to the Bible, Galatians, that's the church. But this nation that calls itself Israel is celebrating and now has used the opportunity to invade Syria from the south and to take over territory and say this is now a new buffer zone between Syria and the territory that Israel has in its state. And obviously, we know that it's taken the Golan Heights a long time ago, but it's expanding from the Golan Heights towards Damascus. And already you see pictures of Israeli tanks rolling across the border into Syria proper and expanding the territory it controls and bombing facilities in Syria, bombing buildings in Damascus. And that's all happened since this HTS group has toppled the Assad regime and declared itself to be the party in control of Syria. How it did this so quickly it's astonishing, and it seems from what I've been looking at, reports I've been looking at, which tell you the truth. You're not going to get the truth from the Western mainstream media, of course. You're not going to get the truth from the governments, Keir Starmer's government, Joe Biden's government, who are supporting this and celebrating. You're not going to get the truth from them. But if you look at the Duran, for example, look at good journalists who know what's going on in the situation, Vanessa Beeley, Eva Bartlett, Patrick Henningsen, they'll tell you what's really going on. But it seems that the Syrian army put up hardly any resistance. And this group just basically walked freely down the motorway, taking city by city by city in a period of 12 days. I mean, 4 big cities, the 4 biggest cities, I think, in Syria, Aleppo, Hama, Homs, and Damascus, without any resistance whatsoever, apart from the first couple of days, the Russia supplied air support to try to stop them from advancing. But then when they saw the Syrian army on the ground not offering any resistance and just basically melting away into the background, pretending that there were civilians, not, even abandoning their military clothes and their weapons and just melting away, not resisting whatsoever. This group just had, it was like just a drive down the highway for them without any or very, very little resistance whatsoever. And that is a great mystery. It's astounding that there was no fight. There was not really a war or a conflict. It was a conquest without any resistance, and so they just took over the country, very easily. Why this happened, I don't know. Why did the Syrian army not put up a fight against these people? Maybe they thought, well, the people there calculated well they would lose. They want to retreat and save their lives and fight and hold Damascus, but even that didn't happen. I don't know. So I'm still trying to figure that out. And even people who are familiar with the region are still trying to work out why this happened. Did someone give an order? Was there some secret deal done? I don't know. There's still a lot we don't know. But we do know that this group has essentially conquered the country without hardly any fight or hardly any resistance. So it is a big shock, because a stable country, was being destabilized for many, many years, has now fallen into the hands of a bloodthirsty, mass murdering Islamist group that is ironically and appallingly supported by Turkey, Israel, and the governments and media and intelligence services in the West. Which again, if you look at what they say, oh, we need to stand up against Islamists, why are they supporting this group? That doesn't make any sense. And indeed, this group actually is proscribed as a terrorist organization because the intelligence services know that it is ISIS, Al-Qaeda rebranded. But they're already working on PR for this group. And I'm just going to read some things here off my screen. The former head of MI6 is called Sir John Sawers. And he's just done an interview on Sky News where he's trying to paint this group in a nice light. Paint them pretty, if you like. It's not a proper metaphor, but you know what I mean. He said here that this group, in recent years, it's not acting like a terrorist organization, it's acting like a liberation group, a liberation movement. So this terrorist organization that is basically Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Al-Nusra Front is prescribed everywhere in the West by the USA, by the UK, even by the UN, is now being rebranded as a liberation movement. He says here, the leader, Abu Muhammad al-Jalani, has made great efforts over the last 10 years to distance himself from those terrorist groups, even though there's a picture by the US Embassy in Syria from 2017 showing that he's wanted as a terrorist and all the dreadful things that he's done and he's led many other thousands of people to do as ISIS and as the Al-Nusra Front, cutting people's heads off and so on. But now he's like, now he's a liberator. That's what the former head of the British MI6 is saying. Look, he says, and now they're even thinking of removing the prescription of this group as a terrorist organization because now they're in charge in Syria. He says, it would be rather ridiculous, actually, if we're unable to engage with the new leadership in Syria because of a proscription dating back 12 years. But, I mean, this doesn't make any sense because Hamas is in charge in Palestine. That's been proscribed for a long time, but, that's still got a proscription. Hezbollah is the government in Lebanon, and they've got a proscription going back more than 12 years, I think, for their military wing anyway. They form the governments in Gaza and Lebanon, but they're still prescribed. And here we've got a terrorist organization with terrorist proscriptions coming in to take over Syria, and almost immediately Western governments are saying, oh, well, no, we're not going to call them terrorists anymore. We're going to call them liberators. Indeed, just this morning, a Labour cabinet minister in the UK, Pat McFadden, has said that they're going to revisit and reconsider whether this group stays a prescribed terrorist organisation or whether they lift it. So what might happen later this week or next week is that the UK government removes this group from the terrorist list and starts engaging with them as the government of Syria. When they're not doing that for Hezbollah, they're not doing that for Hamas. and other groups around the world that have taken over areas and government. So there's complete hypocrisy here in what the Western governments, Western media, Western deep state are doing in Syria. And I think the reason for this is because this group actually seems to be very, very friendly to Israel, and also obviously supported by Turkey, which is in NATO. So they're the nice terrorists, whereas the others are the bad terrorists. So the whole thing doesn't make any sense anymore. And you can see they're just tying themselves up in knots. The Middle East is very, very unstable. I've avoided speaking about it for years, but since the 7th of October 2023, people want to know what I think, what everyone thinks. It's impossible to avoid talking about it. And obviously now this is a dreadful thing, particularly for the decent, peaceful Christians, Alawites, who just want to get on with their lives, bring up their families, practice their faith, go about their business. And hundreds of thousands, millions of people in this country's now lives are being turned upside down, and whatever's going on in anywhere else, this is a bad thing. So there's very little I can do apart from pray for my brothers and sisters in Syria and hope that they will be all right. So this is a bad day, but I hope that we'll see a better day. Thanks for listening, everyone, and God bless you all.